The dark silence of space was suddenly broken by a faint signal, a weak, almost imperceptible cry for help. It was a distress call, barely audible, slipping through the vast emptiness of the galaxy like a whisper carried on the wind. The source was far from known space, in a region no one had visited for centuries. The message was a single, trembling plea from a human colony that had long since been thought lost. The message was not even meant to be found. It was not a call that could have been expected, especially not from a place that should no longer exist. But there it was, echoing through the dark expanse of space, desperate and alone. For weeks, the signal had been drifting, unnoticed, ignored by the rest of the galaxy. The human race had long left that part of space behind. The colonies they're forgotten as humanity's reach extended farther and farther into the stars. Few even remembered the colony or cared. The galaxy had moved on, and so had the people of Earth. But someone had heard it. Someone had been paying attention. The signal had been caught by the watchful eyes of a lone scientist working quietly aboard a research station on the Outer Rim. Dr. Aria Dane, a specialist in interstellar communication, had been monitoring deep space transmissions when she first noticed the anomaly. At first, it was just noise, something so faint and broken that she almost dismissed it. But then, there it was again, another fragment. Clearer this time, a human voice buried in static. She froze. The transmission was distant, fragmented, but unmistakable. She leaned forward, her heart beating a little faster. The voice was unmistakably human, yet there was something about it that sent a chill down her spine. It was thin, almost desperate, filled with fear. The voice on the other end wasn't calling for help. It was begging for survival. Help. Where? No way? Escape. Two. The voice broke off, swallowed by the static, then resumed, slower, the words almost incoherent. Please. Anyone. Please. It's too much. Can't hold them off. Dr. Dane's hands trembled as she adjusted the controls. She couldn't believe it. A distress signal from a human colony. It was a mystery, one that sent a cold shiver through her. She had heard of colonies being lost to time, swept away by space storms, or destroyed by unforeseen disasters. But a distress call so far from civilization, from a place that had been lost to history, it didn't make sense. She had to know more. What had happened to this colony? Why hadn't anyone else heard this before? The transmission had come from a region of space where the stars themselves seemed to fade into nothingness, a place on the edge of the galaxy that few had dared to explore in centuries. It was a graveyard of forgotten outposts, remnants of humanity's early expansion into space. Once a thriving colony, now silent, abandoned. The thought of someone still out there, in need of help, was too much to ignore. The voice that had called out had spoken of danger, of something far worse than a simple disaster. There was something sinister in those broken words, a fear that gripped her as soon as she heard them. She quickly initiated a signal boost to trace the source, trying to lock onto the coordinates, every fiber of her being told her she had to do something. There was a story here, a story she couldn't let go of. As the signal's location became clearer on her screen, the connection suddenly flickered, and the voice returned, weaker now, barely audible. No time. They're coming. Please. Help. Humans. Then the message cut off entirely, leaving only the deafening silence of space in its wake. A chill ran down Aria's spine. She couldn't just let it end there. She knew this was important. Far more important than any protocol or guideline. Something was happening out there. And if humanity didn't act fast, they might never know what it was. Aria quickly alerted her superiors. She worked frantically to send the distress signal up the chain of command. But deep down, she knew she had to do more. This was a cry for help, one that couldn't be ignored. She had to make sure the right people were listening, even if they didn't want to hear it. The station's comms were immediately flooded with requests for more information, but the message she had managed to pull from the static was all she had. No one knew what had happened to the colony, or who had sent the distress signal. After sending the transmission, she waited and waited. The minutes stretched into hours, but no one responded, not right away. The galaxy had grown accustomed to ignoring the past, especially the forgotten corners of space. Too many lost colonies, too many unanswered calls. It wasn't a matter of indifference. It was just the harsh reality of space exploration. You could only save so many. Yet Aria felt a deep need to know what had happened. She couldn't just let it go. Her mind raced with questions. Who was still alive out there? Was it just a simple disaster, a cry for help from a group of stranded survivors? Or was it something far worse? And if it was, who could have attacked them? What kind of force could strike so ruthlessly at the edge of the galaxy and leave no survivors? Whoever had sent the message was clearly in danger, and whatever had attacked them was still out there, waiting. As she waited for a response, Aria's thoughts drifted back to the message itself. The final part of the transmission was still fresh in her mind. Humans. The word echoed, reminding her that this wasn't just about a lone colony or a simple distress signal. This was humanity itself. If someone had gone to such lengths to reach out for help, it could only mean one thing. There was something out there, something beyond anything humanity had faced before. After what felt like an eternity, Aria finally received a response. The message came from a higher-up in the Galactic Council, but it was cold, dismissive. They had reviewed the situation and determined that the distress signal was too far gone. The colony was most likely already lost, they said, and it wasn't worth risking any further resources on it. The Council would focus on more pressing matters. Humanity's survival was not a priority to the rest of the galaxy. The plea had fallen on deaf ears. Aria's heart sank. She had expected this. The galaxy was vast, and with so many different species and problems, humanity's plight often went unnoticed. The people of Earth had become irrelevant in the eyes of the greater galactic community. But something about that message, something about the fear in that voice, kept gnawing at her. She couldn't just walk away. And so, Aria made a choice. It wasn't one she took lightly, but it was the only choice she could make. She would go to the colony herself. She would bring humanity's might to bear on whatever danger lay waiting in the dark, no matter the cost. If no one else cared, then it would be up to her to answer the call. In secret, she assembled a team. It would be a dangerous mission, one that could cost them everything. But humanity had been silent for too long. The message had been sent, and now it was up to her to make sure it was answered. The stars trembled at the thought of what was to come, for Aria had made up her mind. She would not ignore the silent cry from the edge of the galaxy, and in doing so, she would lead humanity into a future where they would no longer be silent, no longer forgotten. The universe would remember them, whether it wanted to or not. As Aria's ship powered up and slipped into the endless void of space, the echo of that distress call still lingered in her mind. It was faint, but clear enough to guide her forward. Humanity's answer had begun. The stars would never be the same again. The decision had been made. The signal from the lost colony had sparked a fire in Ariadne, a fire that no one could extinguish. She had assembled a small, specialized fleet of ships, each one capable of traveling to the farthest reaches of space. There was no turning back now. Her team had boarded their vessels, leaving the safety of known space behind, with nothing but the echo of a forgotten distress call to guide them. Aria felt the weight of the unknown pressing on her shoulders, but she knew that someone had to take this step. Someone had to answer the cry for help. If humanity didn't act, no one would. As the fleet accelerated into the darkness, the tension in the air was palpable. The crew, once filled with doubts and uncertainty, was now focused. The mission was clear, and their orders were simple: find the colony, understand what had happened, and, if possible, bring them home. But even as they hurtled through space, Aria couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else, something darker, waiting for them. The distress signal had been filled with fear. It had been a cry for survival, not just a call for help. The journey was long, and every second felt like an eternity. The silence in the ship's command center was broken only by the hum of the engines and the soft chatter between the crew members. They were approaching the edge of known space, a region marked by nothing but void and mystery. The stars here seemed distant and cold, far away from the bustling heart of the galaxy. It was easy to forget that there had once been a thriving colony out here, a place where humans had settled long ago, building their homes and lives under alien skies. But now, all that remained was a faint cry in the dark. Aria stood at the command deck, her eyes fixed on the holographic map before her. It displayed the coordinates where the signal had originated, deep in the uncharted region known as the Dark Expanse. It was a place that few ships dared to enter, not because of any physical danger, but because of the sheer isolation. The galaxy's attention had long since moved on. She couldn't help but wonder, what had happened to the colony? Why had they been silent for so long? And why, of all times, had they chosen now to call out? The fleet neared the outskirts of the Dark Expanse, where stars seemed to vanish into blackness. The silence around them felt unnerving. Even the stars seemed dimmer, as if they were hiding something. It was a region where even the most advanced sensors struggled to pick up anything beyond the immediate vicinity. The only thing guiding them now was the faint signal, the fragmented cries for help. They were close, but the closer they got, the more uneasy Aria felt. She glanced at the faces of her crew, who had gathered around the command center. They, too, could sense the growing tension. They were entering a place where no one had gone in decades, a place where the laws of the galaxy seemed to bend and twist. "Commander," said Lieutenant Cade, one of the fleet's most experienced officers, breaking the silence. "We're nearing the coordinates. The signal is getting stronger, but there's still a lot of interference. I can't pinpoint the exact location of the source. We might have to go in blind." Aria nodded, her mind racing. They had no choice. The signal was too important, and the fear in the voice from that first transmission had not been a simple plea. There was something else. Something more urgent in that call, a warning that couldn't be ignored. "We'll keep pushing forward," Aria replied firmly. "Prepare for anything." The fleet pressed on into the darkness, each ship slowly losing its connection with the familiar signals from the rest of the galaxy. It felt like they were becoming unmoored, drifting away from the known universe into a void of uncertainty. The crew moved quietly, each person doing their part, but the tension was undeniable. Aria could see the worry in their eyes, and she felt it too. They were on the edge of the galaxy, on the verge of something no one could predict. As they ventured deeper into the Dark Expanse, the faint signal grew clearer, but something was wrong. The closer they got, the more distorted it became. It was as if the very fabric of space itself was trying to stop them from reaching their destination. Aria's heart pounded in her chest. The signals were now broken, like a warning from the very stars themselves. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of trap? Or worse, was the colony already gone? Had they been wiped out, leaving nothing behind but the signal to fool anyone who came after them? Without warning, the sensors aboard one of the ships began to flare. A series of strange readings appeared on their screens, disturbances in the space-time fabric itself. The ship shook violently, throwing the crew off balance. Aria's hand gripped the armrest of her chair as the lights flickered and the hull groaned under the strain. She immediately switched to the communication channels. "This is Commander Dane," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Report. What's happening?" "We're getting some kind of interference," Lieutenant Cade responded. "It's like the whole area is warping around us. The readings are off the charts." A strange, low hum filled the comms, followed by a blinding flash of light that bathed the fleet in an eerie glow. The ships trembled as the energy around them spiked. The signal they had been following was now louder, more insistent, as though it had gained strength. But something felt wrong. The fear in the voice had grown more intense. The plea for help had become a desperate scream. Suddenly, the fleet's communication systems were flooded with static. It was impossible to hear anything clearly. But then, the voice cut through the noise once again. This time, it was clearer, more urgent. It was unmistakably human, but distorted, as though it was coming from another reality. "Don't come. Don't. It's too late." The transmission cut off abruptly, and the eerie silence returned. Aria felt her heart race as she processed what had just happened. The message had been clear. Whatever had happened to the colony was far worse than they could have imagined. There was something out here, something that didn't want them to find the truth. "Lieutenant," Aria said, her voice cold, "bring us in. We're going to find out what's going on." But even as the fleet moved closer to the coordinates, a sense of dread gripped Aria's heart. The stars outside the windows seemed to close in, casting long shadows over the ships. The silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's engines, felt heavier now. Whatever awaited them on the other side of the void was no longer just a mystery, it was a threat, and it was growing stronger by the second. As the fleet approached the site, the dark void ahead loomed larger. A final message buzzed through the comms, one last transmission from the colony, just before they would reach their destination. "We are all that's left," the voice crackled. "Help us, before it's too late." The fleet surged forward, now committed to uncovering the fate of the colony. But deep down, Aria knew that the galaxy had just taken a step into the unknown. And the unknown was a place where even the stars themselves could not provide answers. The fleet's advance into the heart of the dark expanse was relentless, and yet every moment felt like an eternity. As they neared the coordinates, Aria couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Something more than just the strange signals and the growing unease in her crew. The distortion in space was worsening, the stars fading into nothing, and the faint, desperate cries from the colony still echoed in her mind. "Help us, before it's too late." It wasn't just a plea for survival anymore. It had become a warning. As they entered the final stretch, the once faint signal had grown into a cacophony of static and shrill fragments of voices. There was no doubt now. They were close. Too close. Aria's mind raced with the implications. Had the colony survived this long only to fall into some terrible trap? Or worse, had it fallen to something beyond their understanding? What if this wasn't just a cry for help, but a last-ditch attempt to warn anyone who would listen? The thought made her stomach churn. There was a strange sense of foreboding now that clung to the air like a dark cloud, thick and suffocating. As the fleet drew nearer, the space around them became even more distorted, like an invisible hand was reaching into the fabric of reality itself. It was as though the very stars were being swallowed by a force unseen, their light dimming and flickering as they approached the heart of the disturbance. The hum of the ship's engines was now accompanied by a low, almost imperceptible vibration, one that seemed to come from the very depths of space itself. "Commander, we've reached the location." Lieutenant Cade's voice came through the comms, calm yet laced with a note of uncertainty. "But there's nothing here. No sign of the colony. No structures. Just empty space." Aria's eyes narrowed. This wasn't right. They should have seen something, any sign of life, or at least the remnants of a settlement. But the coordinates were clear. They were exactly where the distress signal had originated. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of confusion and dread setting in. "Scan for any anomalies," Aria ordered, her voice steady despite the growing anxiety. "There has to be something." The fleet's sensors buzzed to life, and the crew quickly began scanning the area. At first, there was nothing. Then the readings began to shift. The stars weren't just dimming. They were disappearing altogether. Even the usual hum of the engines started to fade, as if the very space around them was absorbing the sound. It was an eerie, unnerving silence. But then the sensors detected something. Something small, barely detectable. "Commander," Lieutenant Cade's voice crackled through the comms again, his tone tense. "There's something ahead. It's moving." "Moving," Aria repeated, frowning. "What do you mean moving?" "It's hard to explain," Cade replied, sounding increasingly unnerved. "It's not a ship, not a station. It's more like a shadow, a distortion in space itself. The readings are all over the place, and I'm not sure how to interpret them." Aria stood up, her instincts screaming at her that this wasn't just some natural phenomenon. The fleet's sensors were highly advanced. If they were picking up something, it meant it was real. And the fact that it was moving, shifting in and out of view, made her heart skip a beat. "Everyone, hold position," Aria commanded. "Prepare to deploy drones. We need to get a visual on whatever this is." As the fleet's drones were deployed into the void, the crew watched anxiously. The drones scattered in all directions, their cameras transmitting live feeds to the central command deck. At first, they saw nothing, just the endless blackness of space. But then something flickered, a movement, subtle but unmistakable. It was dark, shifting, like a black hole in space. But it wasn't a black hole. It wasn't even a ship. It was something else, something intangible and incomprehensible. The drone's readings fluctuated wildly as they got closer. The shapes were not solid, but amorphous, swirling, and changing. It was as if space itself was bending, twisting in ways that defied all known physics. The crews aboard the ships could only watch in stunned silence as the images flickered on the screens. "Is this what's left of the colony?" Aria whispered, more to herself than anyone else. But no one had an answer. There was no wreckage, no buildings, no survivors. All that remained was a dark, pulsing anomaly that seemed to draw everything toward it. The drone's feed began to distort as they neared the object, and soon, one by one, they were lost. The last thing the crew saw before the signal cut out was the terrible, twisting mass of darkness, growing larger with every second. "All drones lost," Cade reported, his voice tight. "Commander, we need to pull back. This thing is beyond anything we've encountered." Aria didn't respond immediately. She was too focused on the visuals from the drones, the way the dark distortion seemed to be consuming everything around it. Her mind raced. Was this the thing that had taken the colony? And if so, what was it? What kind of force could twist space itself, erase entire colonies, and leave no trace? She felt a creeping fear at the edges of her mind, an ancient fear of the unknown, something that no amount of technology or knowledge could explain. She made a decision. They had to investigate further. They couldn't turn back now, not after everything they had come this far to uncover. If there were any survivors left, they would find them. And if there was a threat out here, they would face it head-on. Humanity had already been forgotten by the greater galaxy. But this was humanity's chance to prove that they still had a place in the stars. "Prepare to enter the anomaly," Aria ordered, her voice cold but resolute. "We're going in." The crew hesitated for a moment, the fear palpable among them. But there was no going back now. The fleet, under Aria's command, began its descent toward the heart of the dark anomaly, drawn toward the mystery that lay at the center of the galaxy's forgotten edge. As they neared the distortion, Aria felt the ship shudder. The air inside the cockpit became thick with tension, every second stretching out longer than the last. The stars themselves seemed to fade, their light completely swallowed by the creeping darkness ahead. She knew, deep down, that whatever was waiting for them was beyond anything humanity had ever faced. But there was no turning back. They were about to enter the unknown, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The final transmission from the colony flickered across the ship's screens one last time, this time clearer than ever before. "Don't come closer. They will find you, too." The fleet pushed forward, and the stars trembled. The anomaly loomed larger as the fleet entered its grasp. The ships shuddered violently, as if the very fabric of space was reaching out and squeezing them. Outside the windows, the stars had all but disappeared. The vast darkness swallowed everything. And yet, there was something about it that felt alive. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was as if the void itself had a consciousness, a will, and it was aware of their presence. The tension in the fleet was palpable. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sounds that filled the ships were the hum of the engines and the occasional beeping of systems struggling to stay online. Commander Aria Dane stood at the command deck, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. Her crew was equally tense, their faces lit by the cold blue glow of their terminals. There was a fear in the air, a fear that no one could shake, no matter how much they tried to focus on the mission at hand. The signal was louder now, the distorted voices filling the comms with fragmented cries and terrified screams. It wasn't clear whether these were the last echoes of the colony or something else entirely. "Commander," Lieutenant Cade's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence. "We're picking up strange readings. The anomaly is. It's not just a void. It's alive. The ship's systems are starting to malfunction." Aria turned her eyes to the main display, watching the swirling mass of darkness expand and contract in an almost rhythmic pattern. It looked as though the very space around them was breathing, pulsing, alive in ways that defied everything they knew about physics. She had no idea what they were dealing with, but one thing was certain: whatever it was, it didn't want them here. And yet, they were too deep into the anomaly now to turn back. "Stay calm, everyone," Aria said, her voice low but firm. "Keep your stations steady. We're going to push through." As she spoke, the ships rattled again, this time harder than before. The screens flickered, and the ambient lights dimmed. The strange energy in the anomaly was affecting their systems, scrambling their readings, but Aria couldn't afford to retreat now. The colony was out here somewhere. The signal had been leading them this far. They had to find out what had happened, and they had to find it now. The fleet continued forward, moving slowly and cautiously. The atmosphere on board was tense. Aria could feel the weight of her crew's anxiety pressing on her, and she knew they were all thinking the same thing. What if they didn't make it out of this? What if the colony was lost forever, and they were the next victims of this strange, consuming force? These questions danced in her mind, but she pushed them aside. There was no time for doubts now. The ships moved deeper into the anomaly. The once faint signal from the colony was now a constant barrage of distorted voices, repeating the same chilling message over and over. "We are all that's left. Help us. It's too late." The voices seemed to blend together, as if all of the lost souls from the colony were now speaking as one. The words were fragmented, twisted, but the terror was unmistakable. Aria felt her stomach churn. There was something in those words, something that went beyond the desperation of the colony. It felt as though the plea was meant not just for help, but for something darker, something that they couldn't yet comprehend. Suddenly, the fleet's radar system went haywire. A flash of red lit up the bridge, and alarms began blaring throughout the ships. Aria's heart skipped a beat as she turned to her communications officer. "What's happening? What's causing this?" she demanded. The officer, his face pale and grim, frantically punched in commands, but the screens were flickering so rapidly that it was impossible to make sense of the data. "Commander, we're being pulled into it. Something's reaching out for us. We can't break free." "Full reverse," Aria ordered, her voice steely with resolve. "Get us out of here now." But it was too late. The gravitational pull of the anomaly was too strong. The fleet's engines sputtered, their power systems flickering as though they were being drained by some unseen force. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Aria called out to the fleet, "Do not panic. Hold your positions and focus on keeping the ship stable. We need to stay calm." The crew scrambled, working to keep their ships from being pulled into the abyss, but the pull was undeniable. They were being sucked deeper into the heart of the anomaly. The stars outside the windows, once distant, now seemed to twist and distort into shapes that were not stars at all. Dark, shifting masses of energy that seemed to close in on them like 1,000 unseen eyes. Aria gritted her teeth, her hands white-knuckled on the controls. There had to be something they could do. They couldn't give up now, not after everything they had already faced. Then, something changed. The darkness ahead of them began to dissipate, revealing a massive structure that seemed to defy logic. It was a dark, looming fortress, floating in the midst of the swirling chaos. It was like nothing Area had ever seen, an architecture that seemed to blend organic and mechanical, with tendrils of energy snaking through its hull like veins. This was not a man-made structure, nor was it anything that could have come from the known galaxy. It was alien, and yet it felt strangely familiar. The structure pulsed, emitting waves of energy that sent ripples through the surrounding space. For a moment, the ships were caught in a stasis field, suspended in place as if the structure itself had a gravitational hold over them. Area stared at the massive structure, her breath caught in her throat. She could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful, radiating from it. Whatever had happened to the colony, it was here. This is it, Area whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. This is where they are. Suddenly, the ships jerked violently, as if something inside the structure had taken notice of them. The stasis field released, and the ships were thrown forward into the heart of the alien structure. The crew held on for dear life as alarms blared, warning of the impending crash. But even as they were pulled toward their inevitable collision, Area couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an accident. The structure had called them here. The voices of the colony had led them straight into its grasp. And now, they were about to learn the truth of what had happened. But would they survive long enough to uncover it? Or was this the beginning of something far worse than they had ever imagined? The fleet entered the structure's orbit, the dark, foreboding walls closing in around them. The ships creaked and groaned under the immense pressure. Area felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that they were no longer in control of their fate. Something far greater had taken hold of them. The truth was waiting, but so was the unknown. And in the depths of the darkness, the stars watched as humanity's fate hung in the balance. The ships drifted helplessly toward the looming structure, their engines sputtering as the once controlled chaos of the fleet turned into something far more terrifying. The stasis field had released, but there was no longer any sense of direction. The vessels were at the mercy of something far beyond their understanding. Area watched the screen with a sinking feeling in her chest as the black fortress, if that's what it was, grew larger, taking up the entirety of the view. It seemed to pulse, almost like it was breathing. And from the depths of that vast structure, someone was watching. "Commander, we've lost all communications," Lieutenant Cade reported, his voice tinged with fear. "There's a strange interference. It's like the entire structure is absorbing the signals." Area's mind raced. She had to think. This was no longer about finding the colony. This was about survival. The plea for help, the warning, the strange energy readings, they had all led them here, to this monstrous thing in the middle of nowhere. And now they were locked in its orbit. "We're not turning back," Area said, more to herself than to the crew. "We're too close to not know what's happened. Prepare for boarding. Everyone, stay sharp. We don't know what we're dealing with." There was a moment of silence before Cade spoke again. "Commander, I think we need to consider." "Later," Area snapped. "Right now, we do what we came to do." The fleet was close enough now that the dark fortress loomed over them. And yet, they still couldn't fully comprehend its size. There were no windows, no obvious entry points. It was as though it had no visible beginning or end. It was as if it had grown from the very fabric of space itself, twisted and warped by forces beyond the natural. The ships hovered near the surface, scanning for any way in. The structure seemed to beckon them, its silent power vibrating through space, calling them toward its center. A strange hum began to resonate through the fleet's hulls. It was a sound that reverberated in the bones, a vibration that was impossible to ignore. Area glanced around at her crew. They were all afraid, but they were also resolute. There was no turning back. Not now. Not after everything they had already come through. "We've got an opening," Cade's voice broke the tense silence, his words filled with disbelief. "I'm not sure how, but it's there. A dock or a chamber, something." Aria's eyes hardened. "Then let's go. Everyone, prepare to board. Stay close. We don't know what we'll find inside." The ships glided toward the opening, entering the dark maw of the fortress. The interior was darker than anything Aria had ever seen, the air thick with an unnatural cold. The structures within the fortress were organic yet mechanical. Twisted, labyrinthine corridors stretched out in every direction. Aria felt a strange pull, as though the walls were alive, reaching toward them, whispering in a language older than time. The fleet moved deeper into the fortress, and the closer they got to the center, the stronger the feeling became. It wasn't just a space. They were walking into something alive. It was as if the entire structure was a single breathing entity, and they were intruders in its belly. "We need to keep moving," Aria said, her voice strained but unwavering. "Stay close, stay alert. We don't know what's waiting for us." The crew followed her orders without hesitation, though every step felt heavier. The darkness pressed in around them, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The corridors were filled with strange, flickering lights, dim and sickly, like the structure itself was struggling to maintain its form. Aria felt a chill crawl up her spine, a deep sense of unease. "Commander, look at this," one of the officers said, their voice filled with awe and fear. Aria turned toward the screen in front of her, where a team member had activated a display showing something on the far side of the chamber. It was an image of the colony. The image was blurry at first, distorted by the interference, but it cleared in an instant. What they saw made their blood run cold. The colony, once a bustling settlement of humans, was now a desolate, ruinous ghost town. The buildings were cracked, collapsed in on themselves. The streets were empty, save for the strange, flickering lights that gave everything an eerie glow. But the most chilling part of the image was what appeared to be inside the buildings. Shadows, swirling dark figures that moved with unnatural speed, their forms shifting like smoke. "It's them," Cade whispered, eyes wide. "They're still alive." Somehow, the air seemed to grow colder as Aria stared at the screen. The figures inside the colony were not human, at least not anymore. Something had happened to them, something that twisted them, turned them into these shadow-like beings. "Those aren't people anymore," Aria said, her voice low and grim. "What happened here? This place did it." A sudden burst of static cut through the comms, followed by a voice, familiar yet distorted, as though it had been twisted by the same force that had changed the colony's inhabitants. "It's too late. They're all gone. But they're still here." The transmission stopped abruptly, leaving the ship's comms silent, but the words hung in the air like a poisonous fog. "We need to leave," Cade said, his voice trembling. "Whatever that was, it's not human anymore. They're not human." But Aria didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, on the dark figures moving inside the colony. She understood now. The colony hadn't been wiped out. It had been consumed, transformed into something else, and whatever had taken them was still here, waiting. "No," she said, her voice cold and steady. "We can't leave yet. We have to understand what's happening. We need to learn what this is, what's causing it. If we leave now, the entire galaxy could be at risk." "But, Commander," Cade started, his face a mixture of disbelief and fear. "Do you think we can just walk away from this?" Aria shot back, her voice sharp. "This thing, whatever it is, will follow us, and it will keep spreading until there's nothing left. We don't have a choice." The crew fell silent, knowing that she was right. They were too far in. The galaxy's fate now rested on what they uncovered here. Aria's eyes scanned the chamber ahead. The walls were pulsating now, as if the very heartbeat of the structure was growing louder. The dark figures inside the colony were closing in, their shapes no longer moving erratically but forming a pattern, a procession towards something in the center, a throne.